Hey, Dad. Observe the waiter's countenance. Is it not repulsive? The adolescent raised his mobile device, surreptitiously capturing a photograph. The adjacent table burst into subdued snickers. The waiter merely lowered his gaze, silently wiping spilled coffee from the tabletop. Someone murmured, likely a gas explosion or some such thing. Yet the father froze. He discerned something beneath the waiter's collar, a faded tattoo associated with the Special Forces unit he recognized all too well. Type unfair if you believe deriding others is entirely unacceptable. Daniel Morgan, aged 38, had fulfilled duties as a combat medic during the Fallujah campaign. 5 years prior, he had sustained severe burns while extricating a fellow soldier from a Humvee engulfed in fire following an IED detonation. The blast had left half of his face and neck permanently disfigured, a veritable cartography of suffering etched upon his skin. Subsequent to his medical discharge, Daniel withdrew from military existence, shunning the veterans' associations and gatherings that might have offered solace. He established residence in a tranquil riverside community distant from anyone who might identify him and secured employment as a waiter at Riverside Diner, a modest eatery where he could earn a respectable livelihood while maintaining succinct interactions. Each day he tolerated the gazes, the hushed remarks, the manner in which parents drew their children nearer when he neared their tables. He devised a system: approach from the right, his less scarred side, speak concisely, place dishes with care, and withdraw. The manager, Mike, had initially been reluctant to assign Daniel to front-of-house responsibilities, proposing kitchen duties instead. However, Daniel had been insistent. He declined to conceal himself entirely. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Daniel was transporting a tray laden with beverages when he perceived snickering from behind. A group of adolescents from the local secondary school were nudging one another, pointing with discretion. One youth, approximately 16 years of age, lifted his mobile phone, feigning to capture a self-portrait while, in reality, photographing Daniel's profile. "Observe this," the youth whispered to his companions. As if from a horror film, Daniel heard every utterance. His auditory sense had sharpened since the explosion, as though compensating for his other injuries. He continued walking, his countenance a carefully maintained blank, his hold on the tray unwavering, despite the familiar sensation of humiliation spreading through his chest. At a nearby booth sat Carl Wilson, a retired Army sergeant, dining with his teenage son, Alex. Carl was in the midst of explaining the college application procedure when he observed Daniel delivering water to an adjacent table. The waiter's sleeve had pulled back slightly as he reached across, exposing the edge of a distinctive tattoo on his forearm. Carl's fork halted midway to his mouth. That tattoo, a medic's cross entwined with an unmistakable unit emblem, belonged to the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, his unit in Fallujah. His gaze shifted to Daniel's scarred face, perceiving beyond the disfigurement to the features beneath. Recognition dawned slowly, then struck with the force of a thunderclap. "Dad?" Alex inquired, noticing his father's abrupt stillness. "What is amiss?" Carl watched as his son and friends persisted in their mockery of Daniel, capturing another photograph when the waiter turned away. Without a word, Carl reached across the table and firmly grasped his son's wrist, compelling the phone downward. "Alex," he stated, his voice low and gravely serious, "you have just committed the most reprehensible act I have ever witnessed you perform." The boy's smile wavered. "It is merely a picture, Dad." For amusement, Carl's gaze remained fixed on Daniel's retreating figure. "That man is not what you perceive him to be. Not even remotely. If you believe a virtuous individual merits being remembered, remain here with us." Carl Wilson had dedicated 18 years to military service before transitioning to civilian life. He had been a platoon sergeant during the identical Fallujah operations where Daniel had served as a combat medic. Although they had been assigned to different companies, Carl was familiar with the narratives. Everyone was. They had referred to him as the doc who carried 4 men through enemy fire. They had spoken of a young medic who, despite sustaining severe burns when their transport vehicle was struck, had repeatedly re-entered the burning vehicle to extricate injured Marines. The final man he had pulled out was Lieutenant James Wilson, Carl's eldest son. James had survived because of that medic, though he still walked with a limp. And now, astonishingly, the same man was clearing tables at a small-town diner while teenagers derided his scars. "Alex, "Provide me with your phone," Carl demanded, his tone permitting no refusal. "Dad, what is the significance?" "We were merely—" Alex reluctantly surrendered his phone. Carl erased the photographs, then rose suddenly. "Remain here," he directed his son, then approached the manager's station where a balding man in his 50s was examining receipts. "Pardon me," Carl stated, "the waiter with the burn scars. Might I converse with him privately?" The manager, Mike, appeared uneasy. "Daniel is currently on duty. Is there an issue with your service?" "No issue. I need to express my gratitude to him for an event that transpired a long time ago." Mike vanished into the kitchen, reappearing moments later with a frown. "He states he does not wish to speak with anyone. He is reserved about his past." Carl nodded, comprehending. Men who had witnessed what Daniel had often favored anonymity over recognition. He jotted his name and number on a napkin. "Kindly give this to him. Inform him it is from Lieutenant Wilson's father. He will understand." That evening, Carl sat at his computer, gazing at the empty comment field of a private Facebook group for veterans of the Iraq campaigns. His fingers hovered above the keyboard before he commenced typing. "Today, I witnessed a hero being derided while clad in a waiter's uniform. The medic who saved my son and others during Operation Phantom Fury is serving meals in my hometown, enduring ridicule for the scars he acquired while rescuing Marines. What have we become when we neglect to acknowledge the price of service when it is standing directly before us?" By midnight, the post had been disseminated 197 times across veteran networks. By morning, it had reached several thousand veterans and military families throughout 3 states. Meanwhile, Alex's companions had uploaded their own photographs of Daniel online with mocking captions, oblivious to the escalating situation. Within hours, their post was inundated with comments from veterans and active-duty service members, demanding the removal of the images and the issuance of apologies. "That is combat medic Daniel Morgan," one commenter wrote. "You are showing disrespect to a man who saved more lives in a single day than you will likely influence in your entire lifetime." Daniel remained unaware of the developing circumstances. He worked his Sunday morning shift, maintaining his usual low profile. Yet something had altered. Patrons were observing him differently, with recognition rather than revulsion in their eyes. Late Sunday afternoon, a letter arrived at the diner, addressed simply to Doc Morgan. Inside was a handwritten note. "You carried me 2 kilometers under enemy fire when both my legs were shattered. If you're washing dishes, I'll gladly mop floors. Some debts can never be repaid. A grateful Marine." The manager placed the letter on the break room table, his understanding of his quiet employee transforming with each passing hour. "Type unfair if you believe no one deserves to be ridiculed for the scars they carry while protecting others." Monday morning presented an unparalleled spectacle at Riverside Diner. By 7 a.m., a dozen men and women in military dress uniforms occupied seats throughout the establishment. They entered quietly, selected various tables, and each positioned a small card inscribed with "Thank you, Doc," conspicuously beside their water glasses. By 8 a.m., their numbers had doubled. The diner, usually tranquil on Monday mornings, resonated with the presence of Marines, Army and Navy personnel all seated with impeccable posture, conversing in respectful tones, waiting. Daniel arrived for his shift at 8:30, oblivious to what awaited him. He paused at the entrance, surveying the multitude of uniforms. His initial inclination was to withdraw, to depart and never return to the unwelcome attention. Yet something held him fast. Mike approached with nervousness. "Daniel, these individuals, they are here for you." "I was unaware." His voice faltered. "I was unaware of your identity." Daniel proceeded mechanically to the break room, donned his apron, and commenced his routine. His hands trembled slightly as he filled water glasses, but his countenance remained composed. As he neared the first table of Marines, a gunnery sergeant rose to his feet and executed a perfect salute. Doc Morgan, he stated, his voice carrying in the now silent diner. Thank you for not abandoning anyone on that night. Daniel stood motionless, water pitcher gripped firmly. The sergeant extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Daniel shook it. One by one, the veterans neared. Some introduced themselves as members of units he had served with. Others were simply fellow veterans, demonstrating solidarity. A woman in navy dress blues handed him a small box containing a purple heart. Her father's, she clarified. He had been one of the men Daniel had saved, though he had passed away the previous year due to complications from his injuries. He made me promise to return this to you if I ever located you, she stated softly. He said it belonged to the true hero of Fallujah. By mid-morning, local news crews had assembled outside. Mike, who only days before had suggested Daniel work fewer front-of-house shifts because his appearance made some patrons uneasy, now stood before cameras declaring how privileged the diner was to employ such a hero. Carl Wilson arrived with both his sons, Alex and Lieutenant James Wilson, the latter walking with a noticeable limp as he made his way directly to Daniel. You probably do not recall me, James began. Third vehicle in the convoy, Daniel replied quietly. Fractured femur and shrapnel wounds to the lower back. You kept attempting to stand even with your leg broken. The two men embraced while cameras documented the moment. James turned to his younger brother. Alex has something to convey to you. The teenager who had photographed Daniel for derision now stood before him, his face flushed with shame. I apologize, he uttered, his voice barely perceptible. I was unaware. I acted foolishly and cruelly. There is no justification. Daniel studied the boy's face. I forgive you, he said simply. Just remember, no one chooses how they are wounded, but we all choose how we treat each other subsequently. By afternoon, the viral photographs had been supplanted by new images. Daniel encircled by veterans, Daniel shaking hands with James Wilson, Daniel persisting in serving tables despite the commotion, his quiet dignity apparent in every gesture. Mike approached him during a period of calm. Daniel, I must apologize. When patrons complained about your appearance, I ought to have defended you. Instead, I requested you work less conspicuous shifts. I was mistaken. Daniel acknowledged the apology with a nod. Before closing time, Mike affixed a newly printed sign beside the diner entrance, proud to have American heroes on our staff. Medal of Honor nominee Daniel Morgan serves here. As Daniel cleaned tables that evening, Carl Wilson lingered, waiting until they were relatively solitary. Why here? He inquired simply. With your record, you could have numerous positions working with veterans or in military liaison roles. Daniel contemplated the question with care. Because here, I am merely Daniel. Not a sorrowful narrative, not a recruitment advertisement, not a reminder of the most dreadful day in anyone's existence. He paused. Or at least I was. Carl nodded in comprehension. At times, the burden of heroism was heavier than civilians could fathom. The subsequent morning, Riverside Diner opened to a queue of patrons extending around the block, veterans, military families, and community members patiently awaiting an opportunity to shake Daniel's hand or simply be served by him. The local teenagers who had derided him were also present, quietly distributing leaflets for a fundraising event supporting wounded warriors. Have you ever made the correct decision when all others abstained? Your narrative is also significant. 1 month thereafter, Daniel received an official communication from the Pentagon inviting him to a ceremony honoring battlefield medics. The letter alluded to the possibility of formally bestowing the Medal of Honor that had been recommended years prior but had been postponed due to administrative complexities. Daniel folded the letter and deposited it in his locker at the diner. He had no plans to attend. The acknowledgement, while valued, felt incongruous with the tranquil existence he had established for himself. You are not attending? Mike inquired when Daniel mentioned declining the invitation. I am content right here, Daniel responded. I require no medals or ceremonies. I merely desire ordinary days where people perceive me, not solely my scars or my history. The diner had altered in subtle fashions. Patrons who had previously requested different servers now specifically sought Daniel's section. Veterans continued to frequent the establishment regularly, yet they respected his preference for normalcy, treating him as Daniel the waiter rather than Doc the war hero. One Tuesday morning, Daniel discovered a handwritten card placed meticulously on his customary break room chair. It read simply, "Your scars are medals we cannot wear for you." It was unsigned, but he recognized Alex Wilson's handwriting. Glancing through the service window, he observed Alex and several classmates seated in the dining area. Instead of mobile phones raised to capture his disfigurement, they had notebooks open, diligently taking notes as an off-duty paramedic demonstrated fundamental first aid techniques. Mike had provided the space for weekly first aid classes inspired by Daniel's service. "Seems the least we could do," he explained with a shrug. Daniel watched the teenagers practice applying tourniquets and pressure bandages, the very techniques he had employed under fire. The sight stirred something long inactive within him. Perhaps there was merit in being visible after all, scars and all. Honor does not reside in medals or uniforms, it lives in those who carry wounds yet harbor no hatred. And sometimes a quiet man clearing tables once held the power of life and death in his hands, preserving the final breaths of an entire platoon. Have you ever been misjudged based solely on appearance?